Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing the Universal Baseball Association Inc. J. Henry Waugh prop by Robert Coover. And let's start with the simple fact that this is a 200-page book that is such a Chinese box of wonders. It's one of those books that features so many reflections about so many topics, and it's going to set your synapses on fire, and it's so interesting, and the narrative itself is very interesting. There's a good relation between the main frame of the narrative and a secondary narrative that's going on in the book, specifically about this guy who is kind of crazy and has a huge tabletop game about baseball going on, and about the actual story of the characters inside the baseball game he's playing, and the two narratives relate with each other in an amazing way. In general, it's one of those books I could go on talk about for 20 minutes, not because I'm clever or I read good, but just because it's a great book. So if you're into that kind of shit, this is the book for you. It's a gem of American postmodernism, and some people will love its high density, but other people will be put off by this same density and by the heft of its reflections on power and on death. It's also, in today's age, in the golden age of board games and nerd culture, its reflections on tabletop gaming also feel a little bit off. I'm going to talk about them at the end of this review. But yeah, the main reasons why I do think you should read this book, which is at times kind of fucking difficult and kind of fucking boring, is because it's, very simply put, its structure, its narrative structure, echoes beautifully a game of baseball. Very often it seems like nothing's happening, everything's still, and the clouds are moving in the sky, but apart from that nothing's truly happening, and you kind of feel, why am I watching this? But then there's that moment in the span of two paragraphs where you get a home run, or where the ball jumps to the outer field, and you see if the outer fielder is going to catch it. My terminology might be a little bit wrong, but whatever. But there's that moment of excitement that is just brilliant, and there are a few moments in this book, there are one or two passages here and there that are just beautifully thrilling, and that makes you feel, oh my god, amazing, and makes you jump on your chair even if you're on the subway. It's great. Also, as in so much of postmodernism great texts, as in the early books of Thomas Pynchon, as in the works of John Barth, narrative and reflection aren't really separated, but they very much flow into each other, so much that sometimes you maybe are reading a very thrilling scene about a chase or about a very fun baseball game, and in the span of 2 pages now you're reflecting about the nature of control and the nature of death, and games and sports as a way of defying death. And that, again, might put off some people, but it's very, very rewarding in a way if you're able to, cope with the text enough to crack some of its secrets. Among these secrets is the whole interaction between this fictional world depicted in the novel, this fictional baseball game, and the world of the main character. This kind of pathetic, kind of deranged figure who starts living more and more time into this fictional world. But of course, postmodernism, one of its key reflections is the idea that in today's age we all kind of spend so much time into fictional worlds and into alternate realities, be the reality of television or radio programs, if you still listen to the radio in 2017 because you were born in the 1890s. We spend so much time today in, game realities with video games and tabletop games and that kind of stuff. And this is a reflection on that, this is about taking a step back from all these realities you step in and out of, and seeing if there's some kind of madness lying at the heart of all that. If that sounds bleak and dystopic, make no mistake, this is a very bleak book, and some of its reflections on the whole idea of, focusing on these alternate realities, focusing on this game as a way of forgetting about death, as a way of thinking you can live forever because you've become the gods of some kind of miniature reality, is bleak stuff. It's depressing shit. It's a heavy book for sure. But at the same time, it's refreshing in the way it makes you look at society and maybe at some of the things you do yourself from a different perspective. And even though some of the chapters in this book, especially those dealing with the, you know, the fictional world of this baseball reality, even though some of those chapters can feel a bit boring at times, as I mentioned, you always get, within maybe 10-20 pages, you always get a new event to, you know, keep you interested in the narrative and keep you reading. So much more than other books of high postmodernism, this feels like a good read. And it's my very first Robert Coover, and I know that Coover is one of the great authors of American postmodernism. I have his Public Burning at home. Do let me know about the rest of his production, do let me know about other of his books I should definitely check out, if they're similar to the Universal Baseball Association, if they're different, if this is kind of an exception. Overall, this is a beautiful reflection on escapism, on the way and the reason why we escape into fictional worlds, on the causes of that, on what kind of society pushes us into finding solace and finding, you know, meaning in this kind of alternative realities. And it's a reflection on solitude and on loneliness and on how easily you can, you know, forget about reality when you find such an interesting alternate drug. About that, as I mentioned, in today's age of tabletop games, where so many board games do exist that, you know, allow players to play by themselves, does this reflection feel off a little bit? Why? Because, you know, my first reaction when I read about this baseball game this guy has going on, seriously was, wow, I wish I could play that game myself. Even though the whole point of the book is that the game is diseased and sick. I think that this book suffers from the same flow as The Third Reich by Roberto Bolaño, which is another book on nerd culture. That one specifically is about wargaming, tabletop wargaming, and about the whole community around that hobby. And these are amazing novels, and they're great, and they're filled with amazing reflections, besides being excellent books to read. But both of those books probably come from people who are not familiar enough with nerd culture to understand it thoroughly. And The Third Reich in particular has a point where the main character, who at the beginning of the novel, well, I'm not going to spoil you the novel, but the main character basically says that the whole wargaming community is made of psychopaths, basically. And don't get me wrong, I have some experience of Warhammer gamers who should really reconsider the way they approach reality and the world, but at the same time, that kind of approach, the idea that, you know, playing with these kind of games is kind of a drug, because it means escaping real life into a fictional world because you are diseased and you can't relate with people normally. It's a prejudice. It's the same as saying that metal music makes a Satanist out of you, or saying that being a hip-hop fan means you're a misogynist. Of course, there are instances of, you know, people worshipping the devil among heavy metal heads, and there are instances of misogynists among rap heads, but that's because there are assholes everywhere, and it's not a fault of the medium, which is beautiful, which is pure. It's a flow to be found in human beings, and these texts sometimes confuse the two things. Another text that does this is a beautiful record by the English band XTC called English Settlement, and there's a track on that double record called Leisure that is basically about, you know, playing video games as a form of drug. And in today's world, all of these texts, let's talk about Universal Baseball Association in particular. I think you shouldn't read them specifically as a text about, you know, playing games by yourself means that you are disturbed. You should take it as a reflection on the excesses of escapism, on what happens when you stop noticing the barrier between, you know, what's real and what's wrong, when you stop caring about the outer world because you're so involved in your own personal fictional existence. Do let me know what you think about Robert Coover, do let me know what you think about Universal Baseball Association. I loved it, even though it was a difficult and at times disturbing book. Also, being a book from high postmodernism, expect a high degree of, you know, bodily fluids to appear in this book. There's a glorious scene about puking a pizza, but let's not talk about that. It's lunchtime where I'm at the moment. I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.